on the video. Great, awesome, perfect. And so with that, we are now going to get started. So again, my name is Josh, and you can feel free during the tour to unmute yourselves and ask a question if it's something that is a quick question that will require a quick answer. If it's something that will be a little bit longer of an answer, or one that you don't need to know the answer urgently, then you can feel free to just type it away in the chat. I'll see it, and then I'm happy to answer your question as soon as I see it, and then we'll get to do that together. So with that, let's, enough of me talking, and let's get to me talking. And let's go to the Sinai Desert. So now that we are over here, if you guys could just give me a quick thumbs up to show that you guys can see a really cool video of us kind of going around on a sunset. Great, I see you guys with thumbs up, so we're all working, we're all good. So welcome everyone to, we're actually not in the Sinai yet. Where are we? So part of the advantage of doing these virtual tours is that we're not actually looking at the Sinai Desert right now. The advantage of doing the virtual tours is that we get to go to places that we wouldn't normally get to go to. Even if we went to the Sinai, even if we went to the Negev, I want to choose places that we're going to actually stand in, that there's no chance that if you were on a regular tour or whatever, even if you were there in person, you would get to do. So we're really utilizing the computer in this kind of way. And where are we right now? We're in the middle of the Red Sea on an oil rig. We're on an oil rig in the middle of the Red Sea, and we're at sunset right now, where the sun is setting on our time in Mitzrayim. The sun is setting on our time as slaves in Egypt, and we are crossing the Red Sea to this area over here, which is the Sinai Desert, which will hopefully, after 40 years of this tour, because I hope you guys know that we're signed on to do this Zoom for 40 years. This is Zoom Unlimited. So we're going to be doing this tour for 40 years until we finally get to Eretz Yisrael. And the way to kind of best imagine it, you can imagine it in two different ways. So one way to imagine this journey is through this really cool 16th century map, where it's not as geographically accurate as you would imagine. Some of you may recognize the style of this map from another famous map by the exact same artist who did the famous kind of three petal map of the world, where there's kind of Europe, Asia, Africa, and then a circle of Jerusalem in the middle. Or if any of you have been to the City Hall in Jerusalem, you've seen that map featured there. So this same artist from the 16th century made a map of where the people of Israel went, starting in the land of Goshen, where Bnei Israel lived in Egypt. They built the pyramids in this area over here in the Nile Delta, and they came down to the sea, which is colored red, right? Colored the Red Sea over here. You can see Pharaoh's chariot drowning in the sea. If you really squint your eyes close, you can see actually Moses with a big staff. And if you squint your eyes even closer, you can see little tiny pricks on Moses' head. And you can actually see there's horns on his head, like in the famous paintings and sculptures from Catholic Christianity. So you have, from the green path that's over here is the path that Bnei Israel went, where according to this map, and I'll show you the different options of where the Red Sea is, because it's not actually entirely clear where Yam Suf, the Red Sea, is. But so they went down south to the Red Sea, crossed, and then kept on going around the Sinai. Now you can see that actually it's not totally necessary that they cross this Red Sea according to this map, but that doesn't really matter. Where they get to over here, and you can see Berg Sinai. So my Zaidi, who is here, Ben Goldberg, who passed his last name down to my father and to me, who my original last name was Goldberg. So Berg Sinai, the Mount Sinai that's over here. And then they kept on going around, wandering in the Negev for a while, until they eventually got to the mountains of Jordan. And then from Jordan, they crossed the river Jordan into Jericho, where me, Joshua, because I'm the great hero of this story, obviously, not Moses or anyone else. So Joshua surrounded the city of Jericho, destroys the city of Jericho, and conquers the land of Israel. And then eventually Jerusalem is just over here. So that gives you a sense kind of in a real artistic way of what the path of Bnei Israel was. Here's a 1960s map from a Haggadah, from an Israeli Haggadah, where again, they leave from Goshen over here. They cross this lake, which according to this Israeli Haggadah is where the Red Sea is. And then they keep going down towards Mount Sinai. And this is a much more accurate map that'll give you a better sense of where we're gonna go. and then up towards Jordan, then eventually into Jericho, which is actually featured just over here. So why am I showing you this? Because there's actually a couple different theories, four different theories of where the Red Sea is. So one, as this Haggadah says, is in the Great Sea Lake, which is a salt lake that's in Egypt over here. Another theory is that the more common theory is that it's from this section of the Red Sea. There's another theory that it was across the Mediterranean Sea. Another theory that it was across actually this section of the Red Sea, and that Mount Sinai isn't actually in the Sinai Desert, but actually in the Arabian Desert, closer to over here. There's another tradition of a Mount Sinai that's over here. There's actually three different traditions of where Mount Sinai is. One in the Arabian Desert, one which is where we're going today, which is the more accepted theory, which is in the heart of the Sinai Desert. And then another one, which is by Kibbutz Yotvata, where they make the chocolate milk, which is just over here, one of the mountains by Kibbutz Yotvata. There's a very minority opinion that maybe that was where Mount Sinai is, but that's not where we're going to be going today. But the first part of the tour today is going to be kind of exploring what is the Sinai Desert all about? Why is it so important that Bnei Israel, that the children of Israel walked through the Sinai? And we're going to start today with going to the first area that the children of Israel would have walked through, which is this area that's called Wadi Feiran. Now, Wadi Feiran, so again, we crossed over here on the Gulf of Suez, this part of the Red Sea. We crossed around this area, and now we're hanging out in this kind of southwest area of the Sinai. We're going to, in a second, go down to Santa Catarina, where Mount Sinai is, but we're hanging out on this west side over here, where this is the area that this has the most oases and the most amount of water or whatever. Now, just as a fun little aside, so the color of Islam, so what is the color that you associate with Islam? Or with Judaism, you associate usually with blue. What's the association with Islam? What color? So green. So why green? Why is Islam green? Because in Islamic history, where Muhammad is from Saudi Arabia, he's a desert trader. He has to go through the Arabian Desert and the Sinai Desert and the Negev Desert and the Jordan Desert. And this is a theme that's going to be important later on about desert traders. So these desert traders had to master how to find water. And in the desert, you don't find water by looking around and trying to find something blue. You look around and you try to find something that's green. Because green means that underneath there's the blue water. And so a desert trader who hasn't had a fresh cup of water in I don't know, in a whole day or 2 days or whatever it is, when they finally see something that's green off in the distance, they're really thinking about the color blue. And when they think about that blue that's going to give them that life, then they think of God. And so that's why green is the color of Islam, as this history of desert traders. And you can see from this kind of old picture, which is one that I chose for my background, which is an old drawing of Wadi Feiran from the 1800s. So you can see this kind of, these camels riding in the Sinai Desert and looking for green and stopping in Wadi Feiran. This is a really popular area to this day to go hiking in the Sinai. So now we're moving along, instead of going south towards the Sinai, I want to actually stay along basically the same east-west line. So this is another map of the Sinai Desert. This will be the last, I'm not going to bore you all this time with maps. Basically, we were here in Wadi Feiran before. This is what's called a geological map, where all the different colors that you can see on this map show different types of stones and rocks. And I'm not going to get into all the geology with you. But so where there's all these different colors, that means that it's a lower area. It's a valley where all these different kinds of rocks from all over the place have jumbled together from wind and rain and all these different kinds of things. So that's an area where there's going to be water that's going to get collected. Now this area that's all this light green and the darker green is a kind of rock that's called Dolomite Rock. And Dolomite Rock in the Sinai collects a few different kinds of minerals, including manganese and turquoise, and a few other really important minerals that create different gems, different gemstones. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because in this area, in the spot where we're standing right now, it's called Sirabet El Khadim, where one of the findings in Sirabet El Khadim is all these stones that have writings on them. And if you turn around, whoop, just from behind us over here, you can see all this graffiti in the rock behind us. Where this graffiti, it's not from 5 years ago and it's not from 10 years ago. This is ancient Greek, as you can see. So this is graffiti that goes back 2,000 years. And some other graffiti along these rocks, like the ones that I just showed you a second ago, these stones over here date back older than 3,000 years old, of different people marking where they are in the desert. Why are people 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago wandering around in the Sinai Desert? Because of this belt over here. It's one thing to find water, but the Sinai, there's something that draws people to the Sinai that is actually these minerals in the Sinai that are so important. And the ancient pharaohs would always be buried with stones from the Sinai Desert, with gemstones from the Sinai Desert. And when I say gemstones in the Sinai, for some of you, it might start ringing a bell. What bell is that ringing in your head? What are you thinking about maybe? You feel free to answer in the chat, or you can shout it out if you want to. If you're thinking about the desert, you're thinking about gemstones. Where else in Tanakh do we think about these things? So copper. So copper is actually not here. The copper is actually just up over here by Timnah. You can see where all this like red and all that kind of stuff is. The copper is actually a little bit further south. But think about the gemstones of the 12 tribes. How much detail in Sefer Vayikra and Sefer Bamidbar and in the book of Numbers and Leviticus, does the Torah go into all these details about exactly what someone wrote already in the Shield of the High Priest wore, that the high priest wears these gemstones, right? And it's these really boring, long prose and lists of all these stones. Well, they all come from the Sinai. So this is already a connection that we have to Bnei Israel walking through. Now you see all these little white dots on the map. This is where we're going. So we started over here. We've now moved to the middle. I'm about to take you down south to the Sinai Desert. Then I'm going to flip you all the way back up to this area where there's more sandstone. Then we're going to go up over here, and then we're going to trek through the Negev Desert in Israel. Does that sound good to everyone? So long introduction over. And now let's get to some of the most beautiful sites in the Sinai. We're on Mount Catherine, which is not just the highest mountain in the Sinai, but this is the highest mountain in all of Israel and Egypt put together, where the summit is 2,629 meters above sea level. The Hermon mountain, the highest mountain in Israel, is I believe 2,200 meters above sea level. So we're talking a good 400 meters higher than that. Now, if you keep on going around, we'll eventually get to, oh, sorry, not that one that's over there. I wanted to show you, oh, no, not that one that's over here. I wanted to take you to this mountain that you can see just over there, above this circle. Now, this mountain is Mount Sinai. Now, that mountain doesn't look so tall, and according to Midrash, there's a famous Midrash over here, where some of you may remember it from Cheder, from day school, or from your kids coming back as students, or whatever it is, where I'll read you this Midrash and we'll kind of hash it out a little bit. Where from Bamidbar Rabbah, so this is a source that dates back to like the 3rd or 4th century CE. So the Midrash goes as follows: a person's pride will bring the person low. This is a statement from the book of Proverbs, from Mishlei. This verse applies to Mount Tabor and Mount Carmel, for they came from the end of the world boastfully proclaiming, "We are high, and the Holy One will give the Israelites the Torah on our mountaintops." And we always remember from these stories that the mountains are arguing about where the Torah is going to come from. And you can see an image of Mount Carmel over here in Israel, where it's a huge mountain that overlooks Emek Yisrael. And then Mount Tabor, another huge, massive mountain that just pops up from the valley. Now, these mountains are so tall that there's another midrash about Mount Tabor specifically, where the rabbis say that when the great flood happened, that Mount Tabor wasn't even fully covered, that the peak of Mount Tabor was still exposed. Now, how tall are these mountains? Mount Tabor is around 500 meters above sea level. Mount Carmel, 550 meters above sea level. Now, both of them look like they're even higher than that because they're surrounded by areas that are actually a little bit below sea level and at sea level. So when we're talking 500 meters, it really looks like 500 meters. Mount Sinai, which you can see over here, and I'm going to show you in just a second, this Mount Sinai is also 2,000 meters above sea level. It's basically the same height as the Hermon mountain. It's I think it's the third or fourth highest mountain in all of the Sinai Desert. But when you're in this area of all these high mountains, it doesn't look anything special. So maybe the rabbis knew that, maybe they didn't know that, who knows. And the Midrash continues. But the person of lowly spirit shall attain yitmoch, honor. And this applies to Mount Sinai, which said, I am low. And because of this, the Holy One placed tamach, God's glory, on Mount Sinai. The Torah was given on Sinai and merited all of this honor, as it said. And God descended on Mount Sinai. That the Midrash is trying to say, how could God bow down to the people to give them the Torah if Mount Tabor and Mount Carmel are so high up that God could basically, it's at his level, his or her level. So here, have the Torah here. But instead, because Mount Sinai is low down, God himself bows towards the people. And that is what this Midrash is all about. And it's beautiful to see it from Mount Catherine, but let's actually go to Mount Sinai. After all this time, come on, let's actually see what this mountain is all about. And here it is. Again, it looks very humble because the ascent to Mount Sinai from this platform that's over here, from the St. Catherine's Monastery, it's actually only around 330 meters. So again, it's shorter than if you were to go to Mount Carmel. Now, just a few little fun things to look at. This past year, because it rained so much in Israel, it actually snowed not once, but actually twice in the Sinai, because again, the high elevation allows it to actually snow. This is just this whole area covered in snow, which is just really beautiful. You can see the St. Catherine's Monastery, which is actually the world's oldest active monastery. So it's not the world's oldest monastery, it's the world's oldest active monastery, which is from the late 4th century, where Greek Orthodox, at the time it had just been Eastern Roman Christians, came and founded this monastery on the basis of some tradition of this was Mount Sinai. Now, before the monastery was here, there isn't really any text source or anything that we have that says that this is where Mount Sinai was, but a 2,000-year-old tradition or a 1,700-year-old tradition is still pretty good. So we'll take that, even though it's only takes us about halfway there, because it's another 1,700 years until we get to around when the event of Revelation took place at Mount Sinai. But either way, that's besides the point. So we've got this beautiful, stunning monastery that's here at the base of Mount Sinai, where one of the beautiful things about it is that the library of the St. Catherine's Monastery has some of the oldest New Testament texts in the world. But they've discovered here texts, scrolls of the New Testament, of the Christian Bible, that date back to the 2nd century. Because again, the desert conditions keep things really preserved, just like with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And as one final little thing to show is, and I see that my Ima is actually here on the video screen as well, is that I get to use images from when my Ima and Abba, when my parents, when they were 2 years married in 1979, when they came to Mount Sinai, just before kind of the peace accords. They didn't know if Jews were going to be allowed to go to the Sinai when they were going to give it back after 1967 and everything. So they did a trip to the Sinai. So I get to use some of their photos, which is really fun. So again, you get to see through these cedar trees, you get to see Mount Sinai that's over here. So that's the history of this monastery. But what's really cool about the monastery itself is that this kind of goes into the general theme of another reason why people come to the Sinai, another reason why people come to the desert. Because it's not just for copper or the manganese or the turquoise or any of the different famous gemstones. People come to the desert to find spirituality, to find holiness. It's no accident, and we're going to see in just a second, it's no accident that Matan Torah, that the giving of the Torah takes place here in the desert, because people in the desert are willing to accept things like Torah. and they're much more open to that environment. And this monastery is really a great symbol of that, because when it's built in the 4th century, it's not a given that these monasteries will stay active all the time. First of all, Christian pilgrims and different people have to keep on coming in order to keep it running, to bring food, to bring medical supplies, to bring things to keep everything running as people who are living there. But beyond that is that with the rise of Islam in the 7th century, in the 620s, when Muhammad himself is making waves in Saudi Arabia, not so far away from this monastery over here. So the monks of the monastery send a letter to Muhammad. And they say, listen, you're a big rising power and you're right next door. We just want to let you know that we are a few humble monks in this very humble monastery over here. I'll go to the more humble image of the monastery. We're in a very humble monastery here at Mount Sinai, protecting this holy site that's holy for us as Christians and to you as Muslims, and of course to Jews, but they probably left that out of the letter. But we're protecting this site. And I know that you're going to go around and conquer all these places in the world, but maybe just leave us alone and let us be the caretakers of this site. And if you come here, you can even build a mosque. And Muhammad responds back to the monks and says, yes. Now this becomes important because in the 1500s, when the Ottoman Empire takes over and sweeps the whole region, so they want to come and they want to kick all these Christians out. They want to get rid of all the Christians, all these kind of, what are they called? Fifth columns, all these people who could be enemies of the state from the Ottoman Empire. But they show them this letter. They show them the history of this letter from Muhammad. And they say, no, you can't kick us out. Muhammad himself promised to keep us here. And that kept them alive. So it shows already there's this interaction between Christians and Muslims that only happens here in the Sinai Desert. And all the more so, one that's even more fascinating and even more amazing is that when the Crusaders come in the 11th century, in the 12th century, they arrive in 1099. So in the 12th century, when they get to the Sinai, they see these monks, and instead of slaughtering these monks just like they did to all these other Eastern Christians, because the Western Catholic Christians didn't really recognize the Eastern Christians so much, instead of killing them and destroying the monastery or turning it into a Catholic monastery, they keep it as an Orthodox monastery. So again, it shows there's some magic in the air here that brings everyone together. And now we're going to trek up the Sinai, Mount Sinai, which again, if you look at the pictures from my Ima and Abba, you can see as you're walking up, you can see bathed in the sunlight, you can see the monastery down below. Now, you have to climb up 3,700 steps in order to get up to the monastery. So even though it's only around 300 or so meters going up, it's still no joke. It's still quite the Stairmaster to go up. And all the more so, you can't actually go up during the day because it gets too hot. So you actually have to go up at night. Here's my Ima and Abba. First of all, you actually get to see them as such a young, cute couple over here with my dad in his glasses and no beard. I don't even recognize him when he doesn't have a beard. I've never seen him in my whole life without a beard, so it's always really funny to see him like that. But all throughout the trek going up to the Sinai, as my parents would have seen, there's all these different holy sites that mark different moments in Jewish and Christian history, whether it's stories of Jesus in the Sinai, or Jeremiah, or of Eliyahu Navi, or of, if you look across the way, this mountain over here, which according to tradition is the mountain where the golden calf was made. So it's a mountain that's known as the mountain of Aaron, because of Aaron who kind of led the charge with the golden calf. Now, if we spin ourselves around over here, you can see the steps over here. Now, this person is going down the steps. So going up, you have to go before the sunrise, and going down, you get to go afterwards, and it's a lot easier. So let's actually go up a little bit more. We're climbing up Mount Sinai, or as it's known in Arabic, Jabal Musa, the mountain of Moses. This is a little area, a little hut on our way up that if you want to sleep for the day after your sunrise, pre-sunrise wake up, you can sleep for the day in this hut and you can spend more time up at the top of Mount Sinai. Oh, we haven't made it yet. We got to go. We got to keep on going up. Getting a bit tired, we made it. We're on the top of Mount Sinai. Pretty cool. And again, all the images from the top of Mount Sinai are basically images of the sunrise. Because again, kind of like with Masada, it's always nicer to go up at the sunrise. You see all the people who are pretty cold in the morning. Now, what is up here is when you look all the way around us going down, you can see the base of it. There's kind of this funny looking base, a bit of a ruin over there. This is all from a Byzantine period church. There was a church that was up here that was built in the 6th century. But over the years, the church kind of fell in disrepair. And now there's this smaller church that's over here. And next to the church is this mosque, which is known as the Mosque of Moses. Now again, it's a little humble mosque and a little humble church, but where else in the world do you see these two, a mosque and a church, literally right next to each other, where people can just kind of bounce between the two of them? And in between the mosque and the church, we get my dad, my Abba, who was wearing tefillin on that morning in 1979, where he's with his tefillin and with his siddur, and he gets to daven on the top of Mount Sinai. How special is that? And to finish our time on Mount Sinai before we move on a little bit more and kind of go around into the desert a little bit, I'll just finish with another little midrash over here. It's from Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. And they encamped in the desert. The Torah was given openly in a public place. For if it were given in the land of Israel, they could say to the nations of the world, you have no portion in it. But it was given openly in a public place, and all who wanted to take it may come and take it. Part of the idea of giving the Torah in the Sinai is that you're not giving the Torah in Jerusalem, where eventually the temple is built and Jews or Israelites lay claim to Jerusalem. This is our capital. The Torah was given here. Our temple is here. The sacrifice of Yitzchak took place here. This is our place. And it didn't take place in any other big city where people can go and see it as a big pilgrimage place. Instead, it's in the desert, in the middle of nowhere, essentially in a place that's hefker, which is like a term for it's no one's. Anyone can claim it. The desert is a place where kind of like the people, the caravan traders who are going through, in order to survive in the desert, you have to work together. You have to be open to sharing ideas, sharing water, sharing food. That way everyone can survive. So in that kind of mentality, in that kind of atmosphere, that's the kind of way that you can hear things about like God, where you can hear an idea of like giving the Torah, of receiving the Torah, and be open to the idea because you're already in a place where you're open to new ideas and new suggestions. And only in a place like the desert can you have a holy site to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike, and have all three religions working perfectly side by side with no problem, and no one's going to argue, and no one's going to, fight over which rock is theirs and which rock is yours. It's all everyone's rock, and we're all happy that we're all here together in that. Before I move on to the next section, does anyone have any questions? You can feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourselves. Do you have any questions? Or you can raise your hand. No? Okay, great. Yeah, questions. Were there ever any synagogues there? There were never any synagogues there, just my Abba who went there with his tefillin.
Right, because what you were showing us, like, we don't know for sure that that was Mount Sinai.
Correct. There's actually, it's an important Jewish tradition that we don't know where Sinai is, and we don't look for Sinai, and we don't look for Moses' burial place. It's these kinds of things that we don't want those places to take away from, sure, like the Negev and the Sinai were these important moments in our history, of course, if not the most important moment in our history, but they built us as a nation in order for us to go in the land of Israel. And the land of Israel is the goal. The goal isn't being on Mount Sinai. The goal is getting the Torah on Mount Sinai and taking it with us wherever we go and using that to build our community. And I think that's part of why Mount Sinai was never really that sought after for Jews as well. Also, Jews in general are a bit wary about holy sites and holy graves and holy artifacts, the way that, especially in the Christian world, they're much more into that kind of a thing. I think the Jews are a little bit wary of, if it's avodah zarah, like that kind of thing. We don't want to think that anything might be idol worship, even if it is a holy object in Jewish history. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So
bit of
it's
a
only
long.
the Christians and or the Muslims that identified that as being Mount Sinai.
It was the first time that we know for sure that this is identified as Mount Sinai is the Christians who built that monastery there. But the Byzantine Christians of the Eastern Empire, like they didn't just build in holy places just like they didn't just like pick a place and call it a holy place. Like it would have been based on some sort of tradition. Whether that tradition was 100 years old or is 1,000 years old, we don't know. But it's interesting because the steps themselves, like what the steps that we went on before, in order to, I went to go backwards. The steps that we climbed to go up to Mount Sinai, so those archaeologists have tried to date how old these steps are. Some people say it's from the 4th century, some people say it's from the 7th century, and there's a minority opinion of archaeologists who obviously want a little bit more, to make more headlines in the biblical archaeology world, that they've, found evidence of maybe that they predate the monastery themselves, that maybe they are over 2,000 years old, which implies that it's even older of a tradition to go up Mount Sinai than the Byzantine period, the 4th century church there. So yeah.
Thank you.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, so we'll keep on going around. So we've now moved on a little bit from Mount Sinai. Now we're going up towards the Negev desert a little bit. So let's go back to our handy dandy map over here, where we're moving up towards the eastern area. Now, I couldn't get to a really good spot on the app to actually be at this place called Untitled Chapter, but in 1967, when Israel conquers Sinai, so archaeologists go and they find all these different hills in the eastern area where they found a tell. They found an archaeological site. And they found this one, which is really interesting, which is called Untitled Chapter, which some of the most interesting findings in all of biblical archaeology was found here. One of the images that they found on a piece of pottery is this one, where you have an image of Baal, which is the old Canaanite god of rain and storms and kind of the number one god that Israelites would worship, to get God angry, was they would worship the Canaanite god of Baal. And they also found this image over here, which is pretty certain that this is also maybe the Israelite god Adonai. And then this image back here, which might be Asherah. Now, who is Asherah? So all through Tanakh, the children of Israel, whether they're in Israel or walking through the Sinai or whatever it is, there's all these laws about don't worship Baal, the Canaanite god, and don't worship Asherah. Now, who is Asherah? Asherah is the wife of God, the wife of Adonai, where there's this maternal figure that was married to God. Now, it's a really strange thing that in our heads, we think of kind of monotheism as being, this dominant thing, like everyone was monotheist. But all throughout Tanakh, all the time, we're being reminded how many times that the people need to only worship one God and how many times all the other gods were destroyed. So if you keep on having to say it so often and so often and so often, it means that there's a lot of other kinds of God worship that's going on, where the Israelite people it's kind of like the old Jewish joke where, this is the shul that I daven in, and like the Jews stranded on the desert island, where this is the synagogue I pray in, this is the one I'll never set foot in. So it seems like also that's a tradition that goes back at least 3,000 years, where openly Israelites would worship one God. But they'd also in their house, just to cover all their bases, they'd have a few other gods and goddesses as well, just to make sure that things were set and things were good. And the label that's up here that got cut off in this image is that it says that this is the image of God, which is pretty crazy to think about. Now, it's one thing to find that in this image that's over here is another piece of pottery that shows ancient Israelite script. Now, what's interesting about this Israelite script is that it's not from the kingdom of Judah, which is the southern kingdom, the kingdom that survives, the kingdom where the capital is Jerusalem. Where we are right now is all the way down over here in the Sinai. And the site that's over here, where from that piece of pottery that I showed you with the Israelite script, with with this script that's over here, one of the names on it has a more Israelite name as opposed to a Judahite name. And even more so than that, is that there's actually the first ever image, the only image we have of an Israelite or Judahite king, which is Melech Yehoash, who was a very important king for the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, as opposed to the kingdom of the south in the kingdom of Judah. So what was Israel, which is the northern kingdom in blue, doing all the way down here in the Sinai? You would assume that Judea or Judah would be down here in the Sinai instead, because it's much closer. But the kingdom of Israel was the much more powerful kingdom. So part of the reason why Judah survives and that Jerusalem survives is that most of it is in the desert. Most of it is kind of a bit of wasteland and stuff. No one really cares that much about this area. So when the Assyrians come and destroy Israel, they really destroy it and they really farm it because, again, the farmland here is best. There's more water, and this is the place where the kings were huge, massive kings that had real empires. Now, if you read from Tanakh, Judah is the more powerful kingdom. But any archaeologist who's dug or anyone who's walked around and seen the different biblical sites in Israel knows that the northern sites are much bigger and they're much more powerful. The stones are much more beautiful. And they even colonized areas of the Sinai probably to get those amazing minerals from before. And they brought with them some of their, God worshiping from the north of the kind of extra gods. But it's not just unique to Israel. Now, where we are right now is we've moved on from the Sinai Desert. Before we were kind of in this, in the bottom left over here where my mouse is. And now we've moved all the way to the northeast of the Negev to Arad. You can see where my mouse is over here. So we're all the way in Arad. Now Arad, this is a place where Yatir wine, which I was mentioning before. So Yatir Winery is right next to Arad, just to the left over here, just so you guys know. So Arad is a really important biblical archaeology site that is connected to Jerusalem, connected to the kingdom of Judah. Now in Arad, they didn't find a piece of pottery with, a drawing of the image of God. But what did they find? They found a Beit HaMikdash. They found a temple. And why do I say a Beit HaMikdash? Because this whole platform area is the exact same dimensions as outlined in Tanakh for what the Mishkan or what the Beit HaMikdash should be in Jerusalem. This Mizbeach, this altar that's over here, is made with the exact same dimensions, the exact same criteria as the altar, with unhewn stones, like natural stones, and with corners, and everything is the exact same size as what it is. Now, what happens if you go into the Beit HaMikdash and you move towards the west? You're going to eventually get to the Kodesh HaKodashim, the place where only the high priest can go to. Now, again, we think of this only being in Jerusalem, but in Arad, the furthest away you can get from Jerusalem, but staying in Judah, they found this temple where they even found a Holy of Holies as well. This Kodesh HaKodashim, this one little small place that would have been the holiest place in the whole temple. And what did they find there? They found two pillars, one big, one small, and both of them buried in the ground. Now, why is that interesting? Because when King Chizkiyahu from around 700 BCE and Yoshiyahu, who comes around 50, 60 years later, his grandson, they make a really, really big fuss about how they went all over the land of Judah and they destroyed all of the pillars and they destroyed all of the Asherot. They destroyed the Asherah, the wife of God. But when the archaeologists dug in Arad and they found this Holy of Holies, they found two pillars not destroyed, but buried in a nice, honored way. That these people who were so far away from Jerusalem, that it would have been a really big deal to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It would have been a few days' journey. They wanted something that could connect them to God, just as Jews in Jerusalem would have had, the Israelites in Jerusalem would have had. So what did they do? They built for themselves a temple just the same way. And they built for themselves a temple that doesn't just incorporate the God of Jerusalem, if you will, Adonai, which would only be one God, but Asherah, which is something that you see more on the periphery, something that we see in Kuntilat Adrud, something that you see in Arad. Because in the desert, you adopt other people's ideas as well. And they're perfectly fine. They work together. You could be monotheist and you could be polytheist at the same time, and somehow it works. And that's something that is unique to the desert, that just as we're open to the idea of Matan Torah, we're also open to the idea of other people's ideas and other gods even, and the usefulness of other gods. Now, we're going to end, or the last little section of the tour, I'm going to fast forward from biblical times to another, let's fast forward another 700 years or so to this funny looking map. Now this map over here is a map of the trade routes. Before we go on, does anyone have any questions of anything that I mentioned before? I know I gave like biblical archaeology and biblical criticism all in like 10 minutes, and I know it's a topic that people get their doctorates in and stuff like that. But does anyone have any questions or anything about something that I mentioned before? You can feel free to type it in the chat or just unmute yourselves.
Hi, Josh. It's Brenda Kamen. Sorry, I had to leave to take a call from my grandson. Did you cover anything about Petra anything I missed?
I'm about to mention Petra right now.
Okay, because the trade route is what made me think about Petra.
Right, so perfect bridge. That's a great comment that you make.
Because we're about to mention, hadn't been there, and I've got this picture in my mind now. Thank you.
Exactly. So I'm about to mention Petra. Why am I about to mention Petra? Because just as the Sinai Desert over here has these really great minerals that people are going to try to mine for, down in the south of the Arabian Desert, in Oman and in Yemen, so they're not just looking for gemstones, but they're looking for incense. Now, incense is incredibly, incredibly important in ancient times. Now, why is incense so important? Because think about all of the sacrifices that would have been taking place in Jerusalem or in the temple in Arad, and how disgusting it would have been, how the smell, the smoke in the air, and maybe, dead carcasses that are waiting to be put on the altar, and all these animals that are pooing and peeing everywhere all over your city. It's gonna stink to have animals everywhere. And animal sacrifice in general is not the most friendly thing. Oh, I'm getting a question. Are you saying that those two buried pillars are for God and his wife Asherah? That is generally the theory. It's not 100% certain. We don't know for sure. But most archaeologists would say that that is the theory, that it is for, the bigger one is for God, Adonai, and Asherah is the smaller pillar from the thing from Arad, from the temple from Arad. So in this area in the south of the Arabian Desert, you have all these amazing incense that are incredibly, incredibly important, that all through Tanakh as well, they go through great length and detail about frankincense and myrrh, these ancient stones that would provide these incense that would make it so that it would smell nice in these ancient cities. And so you have this incense route that people would go on, specifically the Nabataeans, they were the most famous ones from, I thought there would be two pillars put in the entry of the temple in Jerusalem, which had other names. The pillars in Jerusalem were Boaz and Yachin, which were for this, which were the names of the pillars of the entrance of the temple, but it wasn't connected to those smaller pillars. It's a different reference in that kind of way. Those are meant for beautifying the Beit HaMikdash. So you have this incense route that's over here. Now, I'm going to fast forward a little bit in time to the Nabataeans. Now, who are the Nabataeans? The Nabataeans are this group of desert traders who they come about around the 3rd century BCE. Now, they probably weren't the first people to master the desert and trade through the desert, but they're the ones who were the most famous because there's a lot of stuff that's written about them and how they were allied with the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, how they were allied with the Romans, how they allied with the Christians, how they allied with the Muslims. They were the people who mastered the deserts, where they would walk through all these areas and use all these trade routes. And Petra was the capital city of the Nabataeans, because this is the place that connected essentially all the places where they would get all the good things. They would meet in Petra, and then from there they would either go further to the north and towards Iraq, modern-day Iraq, or from Petra they would go out to the port in Gaza, out to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, why didn't they go by boat? If they're carrying rocks, why didn't they go by boat? You would think it would be much easier to go through the Red Sea. But the Red Sea over here has a great tradition of terrible tidal waves, and especially with tectonic plates underneath the Red Sea, there's a lot of tsunamis that would take place, and they didn't want to risk the tsunamis or the waves or the storms in the Red Sea. They would go in thousands of camels at a time walking through the deserts. And what they would have to do is they'd have to master finding water. And in the Negev desert, there's a whole series of Nabataean sites, including this one over here, which is this totally hidden a water cistern where you can't even see it from the road. Like from the road, you pass right by it, but you don't even see this huge, massive water cistern. You can see how many people that are perfectly socially distanced in the ground that's just over there. It wasn't Petra featured in the Steven Spielberg movie. It was featured in The Last Crusade, exactly. So you have all these people who can fit inside this huge, massive water system that's completely hidden, because the Nabataeans didn't want to give away their secrets of where the water is, because then other people could be like them. Now they had all these other secrets as well, where they built these huge, massive cities all over the desert. So do you see on this map that's over here, so you see Petra is this big circle, but all these little triangles along the way are little outposts that were built by the Nabataeans or built on maybe previous cities over here. And anywhere we see a smaller circle is a major city. So we're right now in Avdat over here. We're about to go to another place called Mamshit, which is another Nabataean city. All of them on these Negev trade routes that would go, again, through the Negev to trek through the desert to try to find water. But they were able to build these huge cities where people lived year-round. And if you're living year-round, it must mean that you're not just relying on trade to bring you food, but you must be farming as well. Now this area that's over here next to the city of Avdat is this amazing green space. Now what is this green space? So in the 1950s, there's a really famous man, that some of you may have heard of, who is trekking through in 1949. He's already trekking through the Negev desert with a few of his buddies, Yigal Allon and Moshe and Yitzhak Rabin, where this guy, David Ben-Gurion, you may have heard him before, he's walking around and he sees these people who are smashing rocks in the Negev, in the heart of the Negev desert, in a place called Stable Care. And he says, wow, that's pretty amazing what you guys are doing, you men and women, you kibbutznikim. I'm used to all you people doing it up in the north. But David Ben-Gurion sees these people and realizes that the future of Israel is really the Negev. That so much of the land that Israel had in 1948, this before 1967 when the land of Israel tripled in size, so much of Israel was Negev desert. We got to make something out of it. And David Ben-Gurion orders for a scientific project to start taking place next to Avdat, saying, hey, if the Nabataeans can do it, we can do it too. I want you to use only technologies that the Nabataeans would have had and grow things. See what you can grow. And since the 1950s, there's been this project that's been going on, all these green spaces over here, to grow desert produce, trying to use techniques that the Nabataeans did. Now, using drip irrigation, all these things, nowadays it would make it a little bit easier. But they haven't been able to totally replicate the magnitude of what the Nabataeans were doing, the scale that they were farming on. And we know that the scale must have been huge because even in Avdat, you see this wine press over here. We were talking about Negev wines before. So you have this huge, massive wine press in Avdat. And there's actually 5 of them that exist on this place itself in Avdat, which is huge, where you have farmers from the whole area crushing their grapes in these cells, and all the wine being collected over here, all the juice being collected over here, and then bottled and being collected and turned into wine. Pretty impressive, pretty amazing. How'd they grow all these things? So some people think that maybe the climate back then was a little bit cooler, they were able to grow things a little bit better, or they just had these incredible secrets in the desert. And David Ben-Gurion was so inspired that, as we know, he moves to Stable Care in 1952, where there was the famous vote, where the kibbutz had to vote to let in this old former prime minister, 60-year-old man. I think it was actually 65, if I'm not mistaken. They had to have a vote to see if they're going to welcome in this useless guy who's not going to be able to smash rocks like the rest of them. And as you can imagine, The vote was probably pretty contentious, but it was actually unanimous. They welcomed him into the kibbutz. This is an image of Edward R. Murrow interviewing David Ben-Gurion, where you can see the microphone that's over here, where at the beginning of the interview, Murrow actually apologizes to the audience, saying that, I'm sorry if it sounds a little bit crackly here and there. There's all this desert wind going on in the sand. So sorry about that. But Ben-Gurion would make it a point to, anytime there was someone who wanted to interview him or meet him as this, George Washington or Sir John A. Macdonald of Israel, anyone who wanted to go and meet him, any head of state or great interviewer like Edward R. Murrow, they would have to go to stable care. Ben-Gurion wouldn't go to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem to meet them. And all the more so, as most of you know, Ben-Gurion chose to be buried in stable care with his wife, Paula, with the beautiful view of Avdat is just up here on the top right of this picture over here. So right next to where Ben-Gurion is buried. So that people don't just talk about him as head of state. If he was buried in Mount Herzl, no one would remember David Ben-Gurion in the Negev. It would be like Joe Montana playing for the Kansas City Chiefs or Wayne Gretzky on the New York Rangers. No one thinks about that kind of thing. Instead, people go on a pilgrimage site to see Ben-Gurion in the Negev. And yeah, they remember that he's prime minister, but they mostly remember that he cared about building the Negev, just like the Nabataeans, and trying to figure out all these ways to make the desert bloom. Now, I'm going to come now to a bit of a conclusion to our time here in the Negev and in the deserts itself. Oh, Barbara says, I was fortunate to meet and talk with him here in 1961. That is unbelievable. I'm flabbergasted. That's unbelievable. So I want to take you to my favorite of the Nabataean cities, which is this city of Mamshit. Now, why is Mamshit so special? So just like Avdat, it has all these really cool architecture and things where there's a horses stable, which is amazing in Mamshit. Because what are you doing with horses? You'd think that there would be camels in the desert. But here they were so wealthy and they were so prosperous that they were able to have, horses over here. Also in Mamshit, just like in Avdat, there's churches, not just one, but 2 churches in Mamshit. Also, around the other side of Mamshit, they have a dam. They were so good at trapping water that they had to actually protect the city from being flooded from the dam. This is how they collected the water. Another thing they would do is they built for themselves a bathhouse where there's still frescoes that have still survived from 2,000 years ago. Now, who are these Nabataeans that are over here? Now, the Nabataeans are a really interesting group of people. Now, why are there churches in these Nabataean cities? Because the Nabataeans, in a way, are the chameleons of the Middle East, where when the people who need all the incense are the Israelites, all right, sure, we'll help the Israelites out and we'll be allied with the Israelites. Sure, you want us to believe in one God? Sure, we'll believe in one God. But whatever it is, whoever kind of pays the bills for the Nabataeans, they'll adopt whatever gods as long as you keep on buying from them and you keep on purchasing from them. But the Nabataeans had a bit of a crisis. When the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed in the year 70, and the Roman Empire becomes the Christian Roman Empire, all of a sudden there's no more sacrifices anymore. Sure, maybe a little bit of incense is used in church ceremonies, but it's not enough to, be the incense of a whole city. So what do the Nabataeans do? They have to adapt. And they don't just adapt, but they thrive. These cities, Mamshit and Avdat, like I showed you before over here, these huge, massive cities, sure, they're starting to be built during the major incense trade in the 2nd and 1st century BCE. But when they reach their peak, it's the 4th century, 5th century, 6th century, after the incense isn't really needed anymore. In fact, actually, one of the coolest things about Avdat is actually, if any of you have seen the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, it's actually filmed in Avdat, but that's just besides the point. So they're building these huge, massive cities during the time that you would think that they would have an economic collapse, during the time they would have an economic crisis. And one of the clues for how they survived is found in a church in Jordan called Madva, or Medva, or Madaba, however you pronounce it. So in this famous church, which exists just on the top over here, so there's a huge, massive floor of the church that is a map of the Holy Land. And the map isn't just a regular, ordinary map that, like the ones that I showed you before, like a geological map or the fancy map that I showed you before. This is a map that the images are, or the dots on the map are actually the maps of the cities themselves. This one, this number 1 over here, is our first ever map of Jerusalem itself, which is really important to get a snapshot of the city of Jerusalem. This over here is the Dead Sea. So instead of facing north, we're actually looking east. The top of the map is actually east over here to give you a little bit of bearings. So here's Jerusalem, here's the Dead Sea, here's the Jordan River. Now this map continues. If you keep on going to the south, you get to this spot on the map over here, which is labeled Memphis, but Memphis is where we are, Mamshit. And you go a little bit further to the south over here, you get to Mount Sinai. Go a little bit further to the south, you get to the Nile. Now, why are all these things on the map? Because again, St. Catherine's Monastery was built during this time of the booming Nabataean trade, because the Nabataeans did the ultimate adaptation, where they adapt from the Sinai, where no one's looking for the gemstones anymore, no one's looking for the incense anymore, but what are they looking for? The same thing that the Israelites were looking for 2,000 years before the Nabataeans, which is God. And they are the ones who harness that amazing ability to find water and to farm food, and they serve it to the pilgrims who arrive in the port in Jaffa. They go to Jerusalem, they go to the Jordan River, they go to the Dead Sea and relax and do the ahava, mud, and all that kind of stuff. And then they go further to the south, through the Negev to Mamshit, go to Avdat, and then they go to Mount Sinai. And it's in that place that they find that spirituality, they find that holiness. And it's the Nabataeans that really preserve that sense of bringing people together from all over the world, no matter what language, no matter how many gods you believe in, or which God you believe in, or how you believe in God, the Nabataeans will take care of you. And they're helping to make sure that you find all of these, they help you find all these places. Right, you can go to the Cardo in Jerusalem, you can see the map of Jerusalem. And the last place I want to end with you over here is another really fun oasis. We're actually by Ein Avdat again. And I wanted to end with you with one final midrash, where this is kind of a midrash that really sums everything up. Sorry, we've gone a couple minutes over, but I hope you guys don't mind. Where this final midrash really kind of helps to sum up what the desert is all about. It's a midrash about Shir HaShirim, which is the book that, it's the book of, songs of love, which we think about especially during weddings, but it's a book of poems that's set in Ein Gedi, kind of the most famous of all of Israel's desert oases. And there's a famous line that says, "Who is she that comes up from the desert, mitrapeket on her beloved?" What is this word mitrapeket? There's a parable to which this is similar. I'm trying to figure out what this word mitrapeket means. One married a woman and said to her, "Go and be consecrated to me in the desert." And when she left for the desert, she said to him, "Carry me on your back." Who is this woman? That's the congregation of Israel. Who is the king? That is the King of Kings, the Holy One. And when she left for the desert, she said to him, "Carry them on his wings." That the act of carrying someone on your back is this act of mitrapeket. And Yehuda Halevi, a medieval Jewish poet from the Golden Age of Spain, so he comes through and also, from Tzfat, from the medieval period, from Tzfat, where Yehuda Halevi writes, "She has found for her a nest in your heart, delighting herself in you and leaning on you." And that same thing, mishta'asha'a imach umitrapeket, that leaning on you and relying on you is this thing that's associated with the desert. And they found themselves nests in each other's hearts, delighting in each other and supporting one another. Kimatza ken lo beliba behi mishta'ashea ima umitrapek. And the whole idea of mitrapek is this idea of not just leaning on someone and being carried on someone, but it's something that's specifically about the desert. And in the desert, you're not just leaning and relying on someone, but you're finding love in someone. And you're relying on people with this sense of love. And I hope that with that, you got the sense of, from the tour, from everything that we saw from the Negev and from the Sinai, that it's a place where you get rid of all of the preconceived notions of hate and tension between different groups of people and between different religions. And all of a sudden, all the different groups can rely on each other in love and in happiness. And with that, I think we're going to end our tour today. And I wanted to thank you so much. Before I take a few more questions, and I see there's a few comments in the chat. Before I get to all of that, I'll just mention, again, my name is Josh Hartu. You can see in my name, I have my email address, josh@hartuvetours.com. You can feel free to contact me by email if you have any questions, or if you feel like this is something that you want to bring this kind of a tour to a friend or family of a different community, if you think that different schools might be interested, or different schools that you might know, feel free to reach out to me and reach out to them and send my name. I'm happy for you guys to keep on spreading the word about these virtual tours. They are really fun, and it helps keep me going as a tour guide in Israel that can't guide people in real life. But also, as a final note, I would love it if you could review me on TripAdvisor or on Facebook, which you can also find me at Hartuv Tours. So you can see my email again, josh@hartuvetours.com. So my website is hartuvetours.com, and my TripAdvisor, you can find me at Hartuv Tours. And if you had a good time, you can feel free to leave me a rating. If you had less of a good time, you can feel free to write me in private, and I can help take your review that way. That way, the most number of people will see it. But anyways, with that, I want to thank you so much. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have from the tour. So I see there's already a question. Isn't Aaron buried on Mount Nebo? So Aaron, I don't know where he's buried. Moses is buried on Mount Nebo, which is in Jordan. But I don't know where Aaron is buried. So yeah. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question or write it in the chat. But with that, thank you guys so much. I had a really great time with you all. It was lovely. And thank you, Beth David.